So Harry went through the outlook for 2014, so I won't repeat it. But I'd like to thank you for your attention and now open it up to questions. Why doesn't Harry, why don't you come up? And David, come on up. We also have executive committee members in the audience, so feel free to ask questions of any of us or the executive committee members. Who would like the first question? Everyone's had their questions answered. Yes, you're good.
Just a moment, please. I'm not quite sure I've ever seen David Epstein being so euphoric about the cancer portfolio. Yeah. But as far as I know, you have one important opening there. The head of the cancer oncology department is leaving. So have you made progress on who is going to be the next head of oncology? Thank you.
Yeah, so Hervé left that position. He got a very good role being CEO of a biotech company, and I worked with him for over 10 years, so we had a great relationship. I was extremely sad to see him go, and I'm sure he'll do good at that company. Thankfully, they're a partner company with us because we sell Jakavi together, so it's nice to keep working with him. We're doing a very thorough search, so we've now identified a series of external candidates who have good profile. I am in the process of meeting them, and then we have some internal candidates as well. It will take a little bit of time to make sure we choose the right person, but given the attractiveness of this business, I have no doubt we'll find the right person.
Rather than immediately naming an internal candidate, because we have a lot of very strong candidates, it's a very critical position. If you think about our oncology business reporting into David, this is a critical job, so we want to make sure that as we make that decision, we've got the best person in that job. Alessandro Riva, who's the current head of development, is the ad interim head, and he's doing a tremendous job. Yes?
Thanks. Holger Alich from German Business Daily, Handelsblatt. Two questions, if I may. First of all, concerning your portfolio review, what is exactly the role of your participation in Roche? Do you consider these shares as a financial reserve in order to finance perhaps another bolt-on acquisition to foster one of your divisions? Do you think it might be too small in the long run? Or is it completely disconnected in that process? Just some of your thinking there. And secondly, about provisions for legal issues on page 220 in your annual report, you number the risks that are not yet provisioned in your balance sheet with 1.3 billion. So just some color on that. How big is the risk? Because we have seen some new legal issues coming up from New York and China even. How big is the risk that these risks materialize in terms that you need to do more provision, and this could jeopardize your earnings perspective for this year? Thank you.
Okay, starting with the Roche stake. Yes, the Roche stake is part of the portfolio review because whenever we would look at our portfolio, we would review an asset like that. It is a substantial asset. Now, as I've told many people, when you think about the portfolio review, 90% of the company is really not impacted, and that's the pharmaceutical division, Alcon, and generics. Those are the three big growth drivers in the company. Those are number one or number two in their segments, and they're very strong global businesses. The three smaller businesses that are part of this review are vaccines, animal health, and the over-the-counter drug business. They're very good businesses in their own right. You saw how our consumer health business grew 10%, vaccines was up 6%, but they don't yet have global scale. And I want to build leading businesses. And so the question is, are there ways to strengthen those businesses? And we're considering all options. The way that the Roche stake flows into that, obviously, is we have to look at it as an asset that is owned by Novartis and Novartis shareholders. So I've said before that you couldn't go out and recreate that position on the open market. Therefore, the value of it is substantial. We do see it as a financial asset with an element of strategic to it, given that it does come with more rights than just a financial asset. But for us to exit, we'd have to get full value, and to date, that there has not been a way to do that. But it would be part of thinking about the entire Novartis portfolio. On the legal provisions, from an accounting standpoint, obviously we can't create a legal provision unless there's a likelihood that we are going to need a legal provision. Yet at the same time, we work in a highly regulated industry, and there are many situations where there are cases where we have defended very successfully and others where we have not defended as successfully. So that was just an attempt to dimensionalize, if you took everything with even low probabilities, what would it look like? So I think from a provisioning standpoint, we are well provisioned, and that's really what you should think about. Harry, do you have anything to add around that?
No, it's exactly as you say. The moment we have something that is probable and estimatable, we provision. We are well provisioned. And here we want to provide some further perspective, but these are very early stage litigations, and from that standpoint provides a perspective, but we are well provisioned on our legal provisions.
Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick add-on. The risk in the last year, 2012, 2013, 1.3 billion, and the overall risk in 2012, what was the comparable number? Because for us as spectators or observers, we think that there has been some new flow of legal issues coming up. Yeah. It's some concentrated in a way. So my thinking might be that the risk has grown in 2013, but perhaps I'm wrong.
Well, there are a few new cases, so naturally the risk went up a little bit. We actually didn't disclose, if I recall correctly, a corresponding number last year. So that's why for the first time we put that in to give an idea of what are the overall trials out there.
Yeah, and if you look at the industry, I think it's the last 3 years or the last 5 years, there was $15 billion worth of fines given to pharmaceutical companies, and Novartis has been at the very, very low end of that. So I think if you were to put us in the category of those that have had real-time fines or expenses, we would be at the probably the bottom 25% of companies. Other questions? Yes.
Feldges from Finanz und Wirtschaft. Could you envisage an asset swap with Roche in order to get out of this investment?
Everybody's fascinated with the Roche stake. We wouldn't rule out any option, but I wouldn't want to comment on any specific event. I think there was another question up here. Yes.
Thanks, James Schotter from the FT. Just two quick questions. One on China. Obviously, the market environment, particularly from a regulatory perspective, has changed there quite a lot recently. Could you envisage having to make any further changes to your business there to accommodate that? And then secondly, there's been a lot of talk about deflation in Europe generally and the impact it's having on companies. I mean, is that something you're seeing, and is it something that might affect your investment decisions?
Did you say inflation or deflation?
Deflation.
Deflation,
yeah.
Okay. Starting with China, it's very interesting if you look at how the market environment in China has evolved. The pharmaceutical industry is growing double-digit because there's a deep commitment by the Chinese government to expand access to medicines, particularly among the rural Chinese. So we're seeing significant growth. Now, the issues that some in the industry have gotten into in China in terms of business practices has changed the outlook a little bit, in that there's more hesitation by some physicians in China to meet with medical reps, and you've seen a little bit of a slowdown of that in that market. But in the long term, China is still going to be a growth driver for a company like Novartis. We showed in the fourth quarter our emerging markets were up 12%, 10% for the whole year, but 12% in the fourth quarter, and China grew double-digit. Now, in terms of our own compliance in China, obviously because of what was happening in the industry, we took a very hard look at our own practices in China. And we're shifting in China to move beyond what is required from a regulatory standpoint. So we've had our Chinese group here come to Basel and management, and we've talked about marketing and sales practices and travel agencies, and we are going beyond what is required so that we can ensure that there are no outliers at Novartis and that we are in full compliance and that we are positioning that China business for continued robust growth over the next 5 years. In terms of deflation, I think we're in if you think about what the conversation has been over the last 5 years, a number of us were in Davos last week, and there was a lot of discussion over the last 5 years about the financial crisis and going over a cliff. Well, nobody's talking about that anymore. Now everybody's talking about a slow growth environment. If you think about Europe growing 1%, the US maybe 2 to 3%, emerging markets slowing down, what will it take to get economic growth again? As we think about this, I think we are in obviously not an inflationary environment in the near term, but I also don't think we're going to be in a deflationary environment. If you look at the amount of money that is being pumped still into these economies, I worry a little bit more about inflation and when it comes. And that's why we're positioning the company through our strong productivity effort to really be able to accommodate when there is inflation. We're able to adjust our cost structure in a way that will still keep the company very healthy. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Takayuki Kato. I'm from the Nikkei Japanese newspaper. I have two questions. One is a research scandal in Japan. Yeah, and I've heard the Diovan sales in Japan decreased recently. And so what do you think of this research scandal in Japan? And are there any effect in other countries? And secondly, regarding the GlaxoSmithKline's sales strategy change, last December, GSK announced the sales strategy change. They will change that sales strategy. They cut our sales normal target, and they plan no money for doctor directly. So what do you think of the GSK strategy? Or are there any effect in your Novartis strategy? That's all. Thank you.
David, why don't you start? Because the Japan.
Yeah, let's talk about the Diovan investigator-initiated clinical trial in Japan, which has been in the news now for quite some months. I had the opportunity to travel to Japan on 2 occasions, and I don't know if you were in the room, but I had a chance to meet with the press and apologize because we had 2 employees that actually were involved in providing support for clinical trials that were outside our guidelines, and something which we would not accept anywhere else in the world. We have, subsequent to that, put in place a number of changes inside our Japanese organization. There's some new management in place. There are very tight controls about how we give grants, about our non-participation in investigator-initiated clinical trials. There have been multiple training sessions with employees, and we will continue to do that to make sure that the organization learns and grows and becomes, actually, in Japan, we hope, the shining light for all others to follow, being essentially, as Joe said, going well beyond compliance, but doing absolutely the right thing when it comes to these investigator-initiated clinical trials. Just to be clear, for the Novartis-sponsored trials, everything have been fine. We've checked, we've looked. We've had, as you know, from the MHLWs, several new approvals during this period of time. So our basic research and development base in Japan is solid, but we didn't do the right things for these trials. Your point about Diovan sales being negatively impacted, that is true. Diovan sales were below what we would have expected last year because of this scandal. It will be the same this year. They'll be negatively impacted. Diovan does, however, become a generic product in mid-2014. So I think the long-term impact is not about Diovan. It's about building and maintaining and regrowing the right reputation in Japan. So all the new product launches I told you about can actually launch well in Japan, and that's really what we're focused on.
And then on the sales incentive side and what GSK has done, it's very interesting. I do think that We all in the industry need to relook at incentives, but you also have to remember that physicians play a critical role in educating other physicians about our new medicines. So, you know, David has said over and over again about when you have a new pipeline and there is clinical data that is coming out, the peer-to-peer interaction that exists between a physician and other physicians is critical to educating how patients should use this drug. And so we want to make sure that if we did change the, let's say, the sales incentives or the way that we deal with physicians, are we providing a substitute that will still enable those physicians to learn about the new drugs that Novartis is launching, because that's critical. Other questions? Yes, very good.
I still would like to take you up on that one. I mean, I always think there is a slight disconnect between all the talk about compliance and follow the rules and regulations, and then you have your sales reps being paid by the amount of drugs they sell. So it's the volume that counts. They have all these targets they have to make, and that there is some kind of a there are two goals that are a little bit conflicting here, as far as I can tell. And so the question really is the industry not moving away from targets that are volume-based, that the sales rep gets paid by the amount of drugs he sells?
I think it is changing. I'll let David start on this too, because David's seen change in this industry over a large number of years around incentives.
Yeah, so first, just to give you my perspective, I think our primary obligation as a company, besides innovating and developing the drugs, is to make sure that as many patients as possible have access around the world. And access means, yes, negotiating with governments and payers to make sure the drugs are paid for, but it also means ensuring that doctors have the right information. And the question becomes, and it's a legitimate question, is how to make sure they have the right information. And I want to give you a personal example. I launched Gleevec. And we launched Gleevec with a very tiny sales force initially. And the reason we did that was we thought everybody knew about Gleevec. The press was writing wonderful, glowing stories about this smart drug that was going to save lives. And what did we learn after 6 months? Many doctors were not using the drug. They were still using injectable interferons that made the patient sick. They were using the wrong dose of the drug. They didn't know how to adjust the dose when the patient had a side effect. And that's because we did the wrong thing by not having enough salespeople out there. So the question becomes is how to train these individuals to interact with doctors to ensure the information is delivered, and they're also motivated to do it in a way that does not push them over the limit to do something that would be inappropriate. And we're working on how to tweak our training, also looking at how to tweak incentive programs. We're looking at other ideas as well to make sure that we can stay on the cutting edge. I am not yet convinced that Glaxo's approach is the answer. It is an answer, and we'll see if that works, but I'm not yet convinced it's the answer.
It's a dilemma, you know. You're raising a very good point. It's a legitimate point, and it's something that we're thinking deeply about, because if we went to an extreme, what David just said about Gleevec would be true of secukinumab. It would be true of all of the drugs that we're introducing, and they wouldn't have the kind of access. But at the same time, we can't incent for bad, or we can't incent in a way that if somebody, and this is again, we're talking rogue employees, would somehow get the benefit from bad behavior based on that incentive. Other questions? Yes.
In an interview, you said that you're personally responsible for the Vasella coaching mandate. I'm interested, what exactly contains this mandate, what are its tasks, and so on, and how it is currently remunerated?
We have agreed on 10 working days per year for Dan Vasella to serve as a mentor for some of our junior people. And this wouldn't be for executive committee level or even maybe the one level below, but really new up-and-comers, because Dan has had a lot of experience at this company. He's got a lot of leadership experience. And when our employees go on a mentoring session with him, they always come back very motivated and very much saying that they have taken away valuable tools that they're going to apply to their everyday life. So we've arranged the 10 days. He's compensated, I think it's $25,000 per day that he does those 10 days, but the 10 days would essentially be 3 mentoring sessions at different times of the year. And that's really the extent of that consulting agreement. Other questions? Okay. If there are no other questions, I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and we look forward to updating you throughout the year about our progress. Thanks very much.